The fluorescent lights in conference room B were still flickering when my keycard beeped twice and turned cold in my hand. Not the warm green pulse I'd seen every morning for 14 years. Red, solid red. The kind that means someone has already made a decision about your future without bothering to tell your face first. I'm Daniel Reed, 52 years old, and in the span of about 8 minutes, I just watched the most important work of my life get handed to a 29-year-old who couldn't tell you the difference between a double-blind trial and a coin. Flip. The CEO's son didn't even stand up when he said it. He just leaned back in his chair, the leather one at the head of the table that used to belong to his father, and scrolled something on his phone like he was checking the weather. The Cardivex formula, he announced to the room, would be officially transferred to Weston Biogroup's intellectual property portfolio, effective as of close of business today. Daniel's contributions have been invaluable during the foundational phase, and the company wishes him well in his future endeavors. Foundational phase. 14 years. 4 clinical trial cycles. 11 rejected iterations before we got the molecular structure right. 16-hour days in a lab that smelled like industrial cleaner and burnt coffee. 3 holidays I'd missed. 2 relationships that quietly dissolved because I was never really present even when I was physically standing in the same room. The formula that could reduce fatal cardiac events in high-risk patients by 63% numbers that had made the FDA reviewer go quiet for a full 30 seconds before she cleared her throat and said she'd never seen results like this. All of that, and the CEO's son called it a foundational phase. Nobody moved. The head of clinical research sat 2 chairs to my left and found something urgent to study in the grain of the conference table. My own lab team, people whose careers I'd mentored for years, whose names I'd pushed into performance reviews and budget proposals, stared at their laptops like the screen contained something critical. The company's general counsel, the same woman who'd helped me draft my original research agreement back when the CEO's father was still running things, suddenly needed to organize her folders. I closed my notebook, capped my pen, stood up slowly, the way my father taught me never let them see the shake in your hands, only the steadiness in your spine. The CEO's son finally looked at me then. Probably expected tears. Maybe a speech. Maybe the quiet kind of surrender that comes from a man who spent 14 years building something inside someone else's walls and suddenly realizes the walls were never his. I just asked one question. Tyler, I said, have you read Amendment Nine-Delta in its entirety? The general counsel went very still. I noticed it without looking directly at her. The CEO's son blinked. He had no idea what I was talking about. I could see it clearly, that particular blankness of a man who's only ever read the summary, never the document. I nodded once, picked up my notebook, signed the separation agreement they'd placed at my seat before I'd even walked in the door, because they'd planned this, had it printed and ready, which meant they'd been thinking about this for a while. Then I walked to the door, paused with my hand on the frame, and said what I said. Enjoy the announcement. First Light is going to be interesting. I didn't wait to see his expression. Here's what Tyler Weston didn't know, because he'd never bothered to read anything longer than an executive briefing. When I first joined the company 14 years ago, his father Richard and I had spent 2 long evenings going over my research agreement line by line. Richard was an engineer before he was a CEO, the old kind, the kind who actually understood what he was paying people to build. He knew that a compound like what I was working on, something that could genuinely change cardiac treatment outcomes, needed protection at the foundation level. Not just patents filed after the fact, safeguards written into the legal architecture before the first trial began. We called it Amendment Nine-Delta. The core mechanism was a dual verification requirement for any IP transfer involving research I'd originated. My authenticated signature, plus independent confirmation from the FDA's Research Contributor Registry, which I'd enrolled in early in my career, precisely because a colleague of mine had once watched her life's work get absorbed into a merger without so much as a footnote crediting her name. You needed both, not one or the other. Both. Without dual verification, any attempted IP transfer would automatically trigger a compliance flag with the Federal Registry, suspending commercial rights until the discrepancy was resolved. I'd also done something else, something that took about 3 months of careful, quiet work over the years. Every submission to the FDA that touched the Cardivex research, every clinical update, every efficacy report, every adverse event log contained an embedded authentication thread tied to my Federal Researcher ID, invisible to anyone scanning the document, but very visible to the regulatory system when it went looking, which it would, because that was exactly what Amendment Nine-Delta instructed it to do the moment someone filed a commercial application without my verified consent. Richard had called it building the house on bedrock. His son had never asked why the foundation was so deep. The drive home that afternoon felt longer than 14 years. I stopped at the grocery store and bought things I hadn't bought in months, food that took actual time to prepare. The kind of meal you only make when you're not racing back to a lab. Lamb chops, good olive oil, a bottle of red wine I'd been saving for a particular occasion that I could now see was approaching like a very quiet tide. My garage still had the old whiteboard I dragged home during a particularly difficult stretch 3 years ago when I needed to think without interruption. The Cardivex molecular structure was still there, in dry erase blue, faded at the edges but holding its shape. I looked at it for a long time while the lamb simmered. Then I called Dr. Holt. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she was in her garden. She always kept her phone in her jacket pocket when she was in the garden. They did it, I said. Of course they did, she said, and I could hear the familiar sound of pruning shears in the background. The question is what you're going to do about it. I told her about Amendment 9-Delta. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You built your safeguards right. You taught me to," I said. She had, literally, 20 years ago, when I was a junior researcher and she was running one of the most respected independent labs in the Northeast, she'd pulled me aside after a seminar and told me something that had stayed lodged in my memory like a splinter. Marcus, she always called me Marcus, a habit from the very beginning that I'd stopped trying to correct. Marcus. The people who create things get forgotten. The only way to stop that is to make forgetting legally impossible. She'd lost a respiratory treatment protocol to a company acquisition in her 40s. Never publicly fought it. Always said the energy wasn't worth the outcome. But she'd made sure that every researcher who came through her lab understood what she'd learned. Sleep well, she said. The registry doesn't sleep. I didn't sleep particularly well, but not because I was anxious. Because something about watching 14 years of your life get labeled a foundational phase has a way of making you very wide awake and very clear-eyed in the dark. The announcement was scheduled for the next morning. I knew because Tyler had apparently told half of the company already. I'd gotten 3 texts from former colleagues before I even made it to my car the previous afternoon. The CEO's son had booked a ballroom at the Meridian Hotel downtown, invited pharmaceutical journalists, 2 senators whose campaigns Weston Bio Group had supported, and representatives from 3 hospital networks that had been waiting 18 months to integrate Cardivex into their cardiac care protocols. I drove to the diner 3 blocks from the Meridian, the one with the big windows and the counter seats that face the street, ordered eggs and black coffee, watched the news vans pull up outside the hotel across the way while I ate slowly. Tyler appeared on the street at 8:47 a.m. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had never waited for anything in his life, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car, accompanied by 2 communications staff members and a lawyer who was carrying a briefcase with the particular tightness of someone who had been told everything was fine and only half believed it. The press conference started at 9. I ordered a second coffee. On the diner's wall-mounted TV, angled up in the corner above the coffee station, the local business channel cut to the Meridian Ballroom. Tyler at a podium with the Weston Bio Group logo projected behind him in crisp blue and silver. His voice was confident, practiced, the cadence of someone who'd spent considerable time in front of a mirror. Weston Bio Group is proud to announce full proprietary ownership of the Cardivex cardiac compound, representing 14 years of intensive research and development under Weston's scientific leadership. This breakthrough, and I want to be very clear about this, belongs to every patient who has been waiting for a better answer. The man next to me at the counter watched for a few seconds, said, "Huh," and went back to his phone. I watched Tyler field 2 questions from reporters. He used the phrase, "our team's innovation," 4 times in 3 minutes. He did not say my name once. The waitress refilled my coffee without being asked. I thanked her and left a good tip. On the walk back to my car, my phone buzzed. A former colleague from the clinical trials division, someone who'd worked directly under me for 6 years. The message said, "We know the truth. Some of us tried to push back internally. It didn't go anywhere." "I'm sorry, Daniel." I didn't reply. The truth was about to introduce itself without any help from me. The hospital networks had sent formal integration requests to Weston Bio Group's legal team that morning, contingent on FDA commercial clearance confirmation. Standard procedure for any institution preparing to adopt a new pharmaceutical protocol, which meant the FDA's registry system would be querying the Cardivex IP ownership records before close of business, and the registry would find exactly what I'd built it to find. The FDA compliance notification went out at 2:17 p.m. I was at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a glass of water, sketching out the framework for something I'd been thinking about for a long time, when my phone started ringing. Not Tyler, his father. The CEO's voice had aged considerably in the few hours since his son's press conference. "Daniel," he said, "there's a situation." "I'm aware," I said. "The FDA is flagging a discrepancy in the Cardivex ownership documentation. They're saying the commercial transfer application is incomplete. Something about a contributor verification." "Amendment 9-Delt," I said. Long pause. A very long pause. I could practically hear him pulling up his copy of my original research agreement, something that had been filed in a cabinet and not looked at since the day we signed it, back when Richard was still the kind of CEO who read every document he put his name on. His voice, when he came back, was quieter, almost careful. "Daniel, the hospital networks are calling. We've got a Senate office asking questions. The stock is going to react tomorrow morning if this isn't resolved tonight." "That's an accurate assessment," I said. "What do you want? Name it. Whatever Tyler did, and I want you to know, I didn't sanction the way he handled this, we can make it right. Financial compensation. A consulting arrangement. Your name on the patent officially." The thing about the way he framed that last part, "your name on the patent officially," is that it told me everything I needed to know about how the last 14 years had been categorized inside that building. My name on the patent, as if it were a courtesy to be granted, rather than a fact to be acknowledged. "Richard," I said, "my name is already on the patent. It's been on the patent since 2019. That's not something you can give me. That's something your son tried to erase." He was quiet. "The FDA doesn't resolve discrepancies on timelines set by stock prices," I said. "Amendment 9-Delt has a process. Your legal team has the documentation. I'd suggest they read it carefully and completely this time." I hung up. The next call came at 11:40 p.m. Tyler. The confidence was gone. What replaced it was something that sounded like a young man who had, for possibly the first time in his life, encountered a wall that his last name couldn't open. "You built something into the system," he said. "Some kind of block." "I didn't build anything into any system, Tyler," I said. "I built something into the contract. There's a difference. One is sabotage. The other is due diligence. This is going to destroy everything we spent years building." I let that "we" sit in the air for a moment. "You spent 3 months as VP of Strategic Development," I said. "I spent 14 years in a lab. We didn't build the same things." His voice got harder. "Familiar register, the one that comes from someone who has never been told no by anyone with actual authority over them. My father will tie this up in litigation for years if he has to. You'll spend everything you have fighting us." "Your father," I said, "knows what Amendment 9-Delt says. I think you should go have that conversation with him right now, tonight, because what he tells you is going to recalibrate your understanding of this situation considerably." I set the phone down and went to bed. I was up before dawn, not because I'd set an alarm, but because 14 years of early mornings had calibrated something in my biology that didn't know how to sleep past 5. I made coffee, stood at the window, and watched the sky go from black to deep blue to that particular shade of gray that arrives just before light actually appears. At 6:03 a.m., the FDA's automated compliance system sent a formal notice to Weston Biogroup's registered legal address, the SEC filing office, all 3 of the hospital network legal teams, and the 2 Senate offices that had sent representatives to Tyler's press conference the morning before. The notice was 2 pages. The core of it was simple. Commercial rights to patent application US 2019 Cardivex CR were suspended pending resolution of a contributor verification discrepancy. All licensing agreements contingent on said commercial rights were similarly suspended. Expected resolution timeline. Subject to federal review process. Minimum 60 to 90 business days. By 7:15 a.m., Weston Biogroup's stock had dropped 31% in pre-market trading. By 8 a.m., I'd received 11 missed calls. By 9:30 a.m., the story had been picked up by 3 financial news outlets, not framed as a patent dispute, framed as a potential securities issue because Tyler had made public statements attributing sole ownership of the Cardivex compound to Weston Biogroup, statements that had materially affected the stock price, statements that the FDA's own records now directly contradicted. I watched some of this unfold on my laptop in my kitchen. There's a specific quality to watching justice work through institutional channels rather than personal confrontation. It's slower, it's less satisfying in the immediate visceral sense, and it's far more permanent. Tyler had built his victory on a public announcement. The undoing of that announcement was equally public and considerably harder to spin. The CEO's next call came at 10:15 a.m. This time he didn't open with negotiation. He opened with something closer to reality. Tell me what you need to make this right, Daniel. Not as a CEO, as the man who hired you and should have protected your work. I appreciated that more than I showed. I told him what I needed. First, formal federal registration of my name as primary research contributor on the Cardivex patent, with no co-claimants listed above or alongside me without my documented consent. Second, a public correction from Weston Bio Group acknowledging the error in their ownership announcement. Third, dissolution of any internal documentation suggesting the Cardivex research was originated or led by anyone other than me. Fourth, Tyler removed from any role with authority over research or intellectual property. And the licensing, he said carefully. The licensing agreement for hospital networks can proceed, I said, under my terms. Weston Bio Group can participate in distribution, they have the infrastructure, but the royalty structure reflects actual ownership. I've already had it drafted. He was quiet for almost a full minute. You had it drafted already, he said. I've had it drafted for 2 years, I said. I hoped I'd never need to use it. But 14 years of building something teaches you to think ahead. The General Counsel's office called me that afternoon to begin the formal documentation process. The tone was professional and efficient in the way that lawyers become professional and efficient when they've been clearly informed that the leverage has completely shifted. I answered every question clearly. I asked for confirmation copies of everything in writing. Jamie, one of my junior researchers who had quietly submitted her resignation from Weston the morning after Tyler's press conference and called to tell me about it, drove over that evening with takeout containers and a bottle of sparkling water because she knew I didn't drink much. We sat at my kitchen table, and she told me about the conference room after I'd left, how the silence had lasted almost a full minute, how 2 of the senior staff had exchanged a look she couldn't quite read, how Tyler had said something like "that's settled," then and moved immediately to the next agenda item, the way you change a channel. Did anyone say anything? I asked. One person, she said. Dr. Patterson from Clinical Operations. She waited until Tyler was done talking and then said, I'd recommend someone pulls the full research agreement before close of business. And then the meeting just sort of continued. I thought about Dr. Patterson. 14 years is a long time. You learn which people pay quiet attention. The federal review process took 11 weeks. During that time, Weston Bio Group stock stabilized at significantly below its pre-announcement price. Tyler quietly stepped back from his VP role. The official communications cited a desire to pursue other opportunities, which was the corporate equivalent of a particular kind of silence. The SEC review I'd been told about through a legal contact concluded without formal charges, but the informal pressure it created was considerable enough on its own. During those 11 weeks, I finished the framework I'd been sketching on my legal pad the afternoon after I'd been fired. Read clinical research. Jamie came on as head of trials. Doctor, Holt agreed to serve as a scientific advisor, not full-time, she said, because her garden had gotten out of hand, but enough to make sure we built things the right way. We brought in 2 other researchers from my old lab who'd reached out in the weeks after the news broke, people with real depth, who'd been underutilized for years in ways I recognized because I'd watched it happen from inside. The NIH contact came through a colleague I'd presented alongside at a conference in Baltimore 2 years prior. She'd followed the Cardivex situation through the trade publications and reached out the day after the FDA documentation was formally resolved. Within 6 weeks, we were in preliminary discussions for a research partnership that would have seemed like an impossible ambition when I was sitting in that conference room watching my keycard turn red. The Cardivex licensing agreement with the hospital networks was finalized through Reed Clinical Research with Weston Bio Group as a distribution partner, the kind of arrangement where the structure of the relationship was very clear and very documented and reflected 14 years of actual work, rather than 3 months of MBA speak about synergies. The first hospital network began integration the following spring. The results in the first cohort of patients were consistent with what our clinical trials had shown. That was the part that mattered most to me, not the revenue structure, not the stock implications, not even the formal federal registration with my name on it. The patients whose cardiac risk was measurably reduced. That was always the point. That had never changed. I got a letter from Dr. Holt about 4 months after Reed Clinical Research opened, handwritten, which was very much her. 1 paragraph. The last line said, "You spent 14 years building the right thing." The last 11 weeks were just the building catching up to itself. I framed it, put it in the office next to a photo from the early days, me and my old mentor from graduate school, squinting into fluorescent light in a lab that smelled like solvents and ambition. Before any of this existed, before the trials, before the formula, before any of the people who would eventually try to claim what I'd built, the photo looks a little like what I imagine I'll tell people, if they ask, when I'm eventually too old to work and someone wants to know how it went. You build the thing right. You put the safeguards in the foundation, not as an afterthought. You understand that the work itself is not enough, that integrity has to be built into the architecture of the agreement, the same care you give to the science. You learn from the people who got it wrong before you so that you can get it right when your moment comes. And you wait. Not passively, not in defeat. You wait with everything in place, patient as a compound developing in a controlled environment, knowing that the conditions you've built will do exactly what they were designed to do when the time arrives. Tyler is working at a venture capital firm in Austin now. I heard this from a mutual contact in passing, with no particular weight attached to it. He was apparently doing well at the parts of the job that involved talking to rooms full of people. I hoped, genuinely, that he was learning something different than what he'd learned at his father's company. I didn't know if he was. People like that don't usually take the harder lesson the first time, but occasionally they do. Occasionally, the experience of watching your own certainty collapse in real time is enough to create something more useful than it destroyed. Richard resigned from Weston Bio Group the spring after everything concluded. Health reasons, genuinely. This time, from what I heard. He sent me a short email that I found difficult to respond to for about 3 weeks. When I finally did, I kept it brief. I thanked him for the original agreement, for the 2 evenings we'd spent going through it line by line, for understanding, even then, that the work needed to be protected at the foundation. He replied, "I should have protected it again when I had the chance. I'm sorry I didn't." I accepted the apology, and meant it. Some things about that acceptance are complicated. 14 years is a long time to invest in a place that ultimately proved itself incapable of protecting what you built. The colleagues who stayed silent, the culture that made Tyler's assumption possible, those things don't resolve cleanly just because the legal outcome went the right way. There's a particular kind of grief that comes from realizing that the institution you gave your best years to had a fundamental flaw you'd been too focused to see clearly. Or maybe seen and chosen not to look at directly because looking at it would have made it impossible to do the work. I think about that sometimes. Not with bitterness. Bitterness is expensive, and I have other things to spend my energy on. But with the kind of clear-eyed reckoning that I think is the appropriate response to 14 years of experience, both the good and the specific shape of the bad. At Reed Clinical Research, we're building something different, smaller, for now. The kind of place where the agreements are read in full before they're signed, where the junior researchers understand what protections exist and why, where the work is credited to the people who do it without anyone needing to fight for that afterward. It takes longer to build this way. The foundation takes more time than the frame. But the foundation is what holds. That's what Dr. Holt told me 20 years ago in a seminar room that smelled like old carpet and institutional optimism, when I was too young and too ambitious and too certain that the work itself would be enough of a protection. She was right then, and the 14 years that followed proved it, and the 11 weeks that came after proved it again in a different direction. Build it right. The right things protect themselves eventually. They just need the architecture to make it possible.
Don't pity me. My heart doesn't need your mercy. I can still stand on my own. I was broken by your leaving, fell deeper than I thought I would. But pain has taught me how to heal now and survive what once I couldn't. You don't have to look back sadly, don't reach out with guilty hands. What you shattered made me stronger. Now I rise where I once collapsed. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow. I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling. I'll learn to breathe again. I once begged for your affection. Now I've learned my worth in scars. And the man you left in pieces found his own way through the dark. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow. I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling. I'll learn to breathe again. So keep your sympathy behind you. I don't need what's left undone. Sometimes losing who once broke you is how healing has begun. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow. I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling. I'll rise alone again. I'll rise alone again.
They say just forget. Move on like it's easy. But forgetting you feels like remembering someone I've never seen.
I've been trying to erase you from the places in my mind, but the harder that I fight it, the more you're hard to leave behind. Every memory keeps slipping through the cracks I try to close, like a face I should remember, but somehow never know. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. Every moment turns to fragments, every thought just fades to blue, like I'm searching for a feeling that still only leads to you. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. If I never met you, maybe I would know just how to heal. But now every empty moment still reminds me what is real. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, feels like losing something